everyone, if you haven't heard, I'm looking to launch a podcast in just a couple of weeks. Leading up to it, I've been doing a bunch of test episodes over on my Patreon page. What you're about to watch is a little clip from the latest test episode. If you want to unlock the whole full episode, it's over on my Patreon page. You can see it if you join at any level. But the podcast will be wherever you find podcasts in just a couple of weeks. Enjoy this little clip and taste of what's coming. So that's where I'm at. One final thing we would talk about real quick. It's been came out this last week that Taika Waititi has been approached about directing a Star Wars movie. And if you don't know, he directed the last episode of the first season of The Mandalorian. And most people really enjoyed the episode. It definitely had flavor of humor, his humor inside of it. Your take on this one?
Probably an unpopular one. I think it's kind of a boring take. I mean, I'm not really surprised. I'm afraid that Taika Waititi is kind of just becoming like a company man, and like Disney is just sort of like going to the same pool of directors like Jon Favreau, Taika Waititi, Ron Howard, like those guys. And I feel because people really like Taika Waititi, and they, you know, he had proven success with Thor Ragnarok, which I guess, you know, what he did there just blew everyone's minds and whatnot, which, I mean, fair enough. And he's like a hot item right now, so like I understand them wanting to do it, and his episode of The Mandalorian was excellent, but I just, it feels like playing it safe to me. Like this to me just feels like yeah, we'll give Taika Waititi a shot at a film because everyone seemed to like this. Just very reactionary.
That's kind of what's all. I mean, I see things like this, and I almost kind of feel like, well, I just kind of assumed that happened.
Right.
Like you just kind of, this guy that's already in their little space that becomes kind of a nerd darling. Well, yeah, of course they approached him and be like, hey, would you be interested? Like, I just hear things like that, and I just assume that those conversations are taking place, and they have tons of meetings. That's just kind of how it works. Now, is it actually going to happen? I don't know. Should he do it? I don't know. Does it make sense that there was a sit down there? Well, yeah, I mean, I would assume that would happen.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other question is he going to be directing Kevin Feige's Star Wars movie because of their working relationship in the MCU? I mean, entirely possible. I think what kind of frustrates me is I really don't want Taika Waititi to get pigeonholed into like franchise filmmaking like this, because I'm much more interested in the stuff he's doing when he's given complete creative control, like stuff like What We Do in the Shadows, Jojo Rabbit, Hunt for the Wilder People, the stuff where he doesn't have to put a filter on and whatnot. And so, like everything you said, not surprised at all, but it's just a very uninspired pick for directing a Star Wars movie. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm a big franchise guy, so what I don't want, and I think this is what we talked about 2 weeks ago, I don't want him to be the next Joss Whedon. That it's like this guy that did a bunch of interesting television stuff, these original ideas, and whether it's High School Vampire Slayer, his own version of Star Wars with Firefly, this odd show about like being able to like swap people's brains out and their skill sets that initially starts out as this episodic show and then turns into this deep mythology about like, what are all the implications if you could actually do this? This gets really dark really fast. It goes off in this totally different direction. And then what has he done in the last 10 years?
Yeah.
3 franchise movies. One of them he didn't really do, and it's dreadful. And it's like, what? How did we lose Joss Whedon for a decade to only doing big franchise stuff? I don't want that to happen to Taika Waititi.
Yeah, I don't want that to happen to him either.
And I don't want him to get burned out by the system, because that seemed to be also a little bit what happened with Joss Whedon. He seemed really pumped up about doing Avengers, and then it did great, and people loved him, and he's like the top nerd darling for a little bit. And then he does Age of Ultron, and it seemed like there was a ton of studio notes, and there was all the stuff he wanted to do, and there's all the stuff Feige wanted him to cram in there. And then he's doing the press tour for it, and it looks like he's dying. He's saying stuff that it's like, Joss, I do not recommend you say that, buddy. You probably want to stop. And then here we are, almost 5 years later, or 5 years later, and all he's done is Justice League, kind of, like he did the wrap up on Justice League to make it bad or to make it worse. Like, what just happened?
Yeah, I completely agree. Now, I think Taika Waititi is a much more, because his background is primarily in film. I think he's. I don't think we have to worry about that with him necessarily, maybe, but like, I agree with you. I don't to see that happen at all.
And as long as it doesn't, if he does a Star Wars movie, if he's able to do this kind of back and forth that it seems like he's currently doing, if he's able to keep that up, I'd love to see him like do it. I don't want it to be like the main episode stuff or whatever the new main episode stuff is. I don't want it to be that, but let him tell his weird story on Naboo with the guns or whatever. Like, I don't know what he would do, but let him do that. Yeah. And I'd love to see that, so long as he's still doing this back and forth, one for them, one for me deal.
Yeah. I completely agree with that.
So that's a little taste of what's to come. If you want to see that full episode now, you can do that over on my Patreon page by joining at any level, or the podcast should debut in just a couple of weeks. Keep talking movies too much.